Hey everyone, and welcome to our No Plastics for Lent conversation about acts of service. My name is Ellie Derringer, and I am joined by my lovely co-host.
Baird Linky.
And we also have an awesome guest today who will go ahead and introduce herself now.
Hi, like I said, my name is Kia. I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia today, but I'm from the state of Washington originally, but I'm here in Georgia doing a Master of Theological Studies at Candler School of Theology, which is at Emory University. I've been here for the past 2 years, getting ready to graduate in May. Yay. But I work on a lot of systematic theology, particularly queer theology, and I've been doing a lot more kind of intersectional work with environmental studies and religion and eco-theology as well.
That's super cool. Before we get into the Lent piece, would you be willing to kind of give a short overview of what queer theology is? I think that might be a new concept or new term for folks. Even if they've been doing it for a while, they might not know that there's the term to describe the thing that they've been doing.
Absolutely. So I'll also admit I still consider myself a student of queer theology, and so I'm continually learning and growing, even as I try and practice it as well.
Mm.
But I see there are a couple different strands of queer theology. There's the apologetic strand, which really means looking at, you might know them as like the clobber passages in the
Mhm.
Bible of, these passages that say, oh, man should not lie with a man, etc. And so the apologetic strand of queer theology is kind of dissecting those verses, looking at the, cultural and historical context in which they
Mhm.
were written and providing a refutation of those verses and, traditions in Christianity that say, you know, like queer folks are sinful or practicing things that are not acceptable. Whereas there's another strand of queer theology, which is, I don't know that it has a special name like
Mhm.
apologetics, but to me, it's the more exciting and sometimes more generative strand of queer theology,
Mhm.
which really tries to interrogate the ways that we think about gender and sexuality, and kind of the peripheral
Mhm.
circumstances that are intertwined with that, asking questions about gender and sexuality, sometimes unexpected questions, and really trying to interrogate these things in a really like deep way and in an
Mhm.
unexpected way. And then in intertwined with that interrogation, kind of asking, well, what if things were different? What if there was
Mhm.
another way to do things? What if, differing aspects and diverse aspects of gender and sexuality can really be like a generative and, you know, provide us more context and more,
Mhm.
access to different ways of experiencing God, different ways of worship, experiencing each other.
I'm hearing those two strains aside from the apologetic strain is like a critical strain that's trying to like understand how expectations of gender performance and gender dynamics, sexuality have affected us. Like, what do those do in culture? And then the
Mhm.
constructive side of if we take those questions seriously, how do they help us to grow in our faith, our relationship with God, our relationship with one another? Um, it's good stuff. I'm really glad to have you to tell us more about it. Um, but the question that we've been asking all of our contributors to reflect on at the
Mhm.
beginning of our conversations has been, what has Lent looked like for you growing up? What does it look like for you this year? How do you come to
Mhm.
this season?
Lent is a very like nostalgic and positive thing for me growing up. I grew up like super Lutheran
Uh-huh.
in the ELCA, and I have really fond memories of my church would do, a soup and bread supper on Wednesday evenings, and then we would always sing Hold an Evening Prayer. And
Hmm.
it is ingrained in me. Like I could sing it for you right now, word for word, with no music. And I think it was really special too. I came from a really small church,
Hmm.
and I felt very close with a lot of people there because it was such a small and like tight-knit community. And
Hmm.
so, um, Lent just became a really positive association because it was a time that we came together in ways that we didn't in other seasons of the church. These days, for this Lent, um, I, in lieu of, like, giving something up traditionally, like instead of, giving up chocolate or something, I've not found that to be very like spiritually meaningful in the past, though I have
Mm,
tried it. And so the thing I've done for the last several years is trying to live really mindfully during
mm,
Lent, kind of only doing one thing at a time, if that makes sense. So like if I'm cooking, I'm just cooking. I'm not listening to a podcast and like music while I'm cooking. I'm just like doing one thing or like going for a walk, like just going for a walk and seeing, oh, like what's around me, not
mm,
like kind of tuning out in that way. I find that I generally have like a pretty loud mind and that I find myself, you know, doing a lot of things at once. And so it's been a really nice opportunity that I found like a rhythm over the last couple of years to like really kind of take a reset and kind
mm.
of be open and listen to what I need to hear.
That sounds incredible. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about myself cooking. I was like, I could never. And I know I could. I'm always like, what am I going to listen to? What am I going to not necessarily distract myself, but like occupy my brain with or kind of
Totally.
add to that like busyness and that noisiness?
I'm starting to get annoyed that we're talking to you at the end of Lent because that sounds like a way better way to go about it. And I'm wishing that I'd taken on that practice
Oh,
for myself. Kia, I loved your blog and your reflections this week, and there are a couple things that I wanted to dive into and get a little bit more reflection on from you. The the question that you put, or the practice that you put describing queer theology of to make the familiar strange. I'm wondering how you're approaching that concept at this very strange moment, to me at least, moment
hmm.
in the U.S. in the world. What kind of gifts can we learn from that practice at this moment, where a lot of people might feel like there isn't a lot that's familiar and that it all is all very strange?
I think part of making the familiar strange for me is
Mhm.
looking around at kind of the broad trends of society and interrogating kind of the tidal current that is trying to draw us all in. Like when we look around and we say, okay, why is it that all here in Georgia, recycling is not as big of a thing, which coming from Washington was very shocking to me.
Mm,
But when I look around, I say, okay, recycling is not really, for some people it is, but in like a very broad scope, not as practiced. Why is this normal that
mm,
it's not
mm,
practiced as much? Um, Looking at our political system right now, a little time capsule of March 2025. Why is it normal that we're like cutting the education department? Why is it normal that there's like people are being terrorized because
mm,
they're trying to like find a better life in
mhm,
the United States or find a safe life? Um, like this might it might be familiar because it's happening, but like
mhm,
why?
mm,
And trying to kind of take that one step back and ask why, and then
mhm,
maybe you can find an answer, and then why again, and then why
mm,
again, and trying to really dig in as far as you can. And I think in that digging in and interrogating, you know, why are these things going on and why are we broadly as a
mhm.
society accepting these things? I think that kind of connects with, we're talking about acts of service today as well.
Yeah.
I think that asking why and why and why over and over allows you to kind of find these little points where you can take action to
Mm,
interrupt the like familiar and strange things that are happening. And I mean, I think acts of service is typically thought of as like, oh, I'm gonna I'm gonna unload the dishwasher because I'm such a good child and that will be so nice for my parents. But it's like acts of service can be much, much broader than that too. Like
Yeah.
acts of service to people that you don't know, acts of
Mm.
service to communities and like, taking action, taking systemic action to serve other communities and communities that you're also a part of.
So what I'm hearing is kind of to take the like toddler approach of just asking, but why, over and over,
Yeah.
thinking about that kind of like balance of acts of service being questioning these systems, questioning these things that we take as normal, and also doing something about it to interrupt it. You kind
Mhm.
of need both. I think action without a really strong basis in your why or what it is that you want to interrupt can sometimes be aimless or agitating without kind of a focused goal for transformation.
Mhm.
And sometimes those open ended questions can transform us, but in ways that we can't really, like, that aren't tangible to us if we don't pair it with some sort of action.
Mm.
So I just really love the way that you
Yeah.
kind of like are talking about both of those things at the same time. And, looking at the world around us, why is it that maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if the same headlines that we see now were appearing, there would be shock and outrage and
Mm.
so many more
Hmm.
questions arising. And now we've become desensitized or things become normalized to where not only is there not action in response to those shocking headlines or what should be shocking, there's also a lack of questions being asked.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know, I just, as you were talking, thinking about looking at those trends, there's also this trend that's kind of meta about the very thing you're talking about of there's a trend towards less action and less questioning
Mm.
while
Yeah, absolutely.
not doing that. Yeah.
And I also think that built into that question of why is it this way automatically carries with it the follow-up question of like, and why not a different way? Why can't it be something else?
Yes.
And like
Yeah.
sometimes the answer when you ask why is it this way is really beautiful. Like when you ask these questions about the landscapes of how did it come to
Mm.
be that the forest is arranged in this particular way, you can get to that why, and it can be this opportunity to love something in a more intimate way because you understand its history and its past, uh, and the way that weighs on its current life and kind of guides its future, which is gorgeous. And you can also get to the, well, why isn't there more opportunity for people to express themselves in this way? Why isn't there the chance for uh, people's lived experience to be the kind of a living document of faith of how God
Hmm.
has been active in their lives if they happen to fall into a certain community? And I think both of those questions are so potent in kind of guiding us into relationship with the world around us, and the people that make it up. And
Yeah.
I I think it's a wonderful invitation that you've you've put down in front of us here. Um, and that I think leads to the other question that you've laid out in your blog of like, what if? And I'm
Hmm.
curious, how do you think of Lent as like a what if season? Because it starts with some
Mm.
real certainty, right? Your Ash Wednesday, hey, check it out, you're gonna die. You're you're made of the
Yeah.
earth and you're gonna go back to it. That feels like very concrete, very tangible. Um,
Hmm.
and love introducing a what if to that like super concrete, like super solid certainty that we start this off with.
What your question makes me think of is, what if we did live like that was true, that
Mm,
that
mm,
certainty was coming? Because I think that I I don't know, this is not really based in anything, but I feel like part of the human condition is this like denial that
mm,
we are dust and to dust we shall return. But like you said, that's kind of a certainty that
mm,
Lent is built upon. And so, what if we did live like, you know, we're here for a period of time and then we'll go somewhere else or exist in a different way or something will happen that God only knows. Um, and so that also makes me think too, especially as I'm talking about, like queer theology specifically, what if we lived like we were all dust, like all
Mm,
all of us, everybody.
Our relationship to the environment and our material consumption, and kind of this idea
Mhm.
of like when we live in this scarcity mindset, we're like trying to accumulate wealth and materials and items, but they can't go with us when we return to dust. And I understand that in some ways it's a much more complicated conversation when people want to prepare to take care of their families and like what they're going to leave behind and set
Mhm.
other people up for success. But also when we get so stuck in that idea of focusing our whole lives on accumulating wealth at the expense, or wealth and materials at the expense of others,
mhm,
obviously that's where we see so much falling apart and so much pending suffering that's coming. And some people
Mhm.
are already experiencing, the most vulnerable in our societies are already experiencing it. Um, and I think, if I can go there, I think we also need to take that lens and look at our churches, especially when thinking about queerness and radical inclusion and
Mhm.
acceptance.
mhm,
Because I think there's this fear and this scarcity mindset that if we push too far, people will leave.
mm,
Mm.
And then you're focusing more on who would be leaving out of hate or sin, truly,
mhm,
versus who really wants to stay and be here because of love and their faith, and thinking about like how do we lean on abundance and faith that things might work out, might God might have our back, but we definitely can have each other as community
mm,
and as networks. And
Mhm.
instead of fearing this potential pending doom of the institutional church, that fear is causing current suffering, and exclusion. And so I just kind of I'm seeing some of those lines being drawn. And so I'm curious, Kia, if you just want to speak to kind of as you've been stepping more into these spaces, talking about like eco theology and also queer theology, like what are some of the connections that you see, or just anything you want to uplift from those kind of Venn diagrams joining together?
Yes, absolutely. One of the big things that has come up for me in looking at, eco theology and queer theology and trying to kind of connect those together is how do we think about hope and how do we think about the future? Because a lot of our environmental work,
mm,
as you know, a collective society is very future based of this like we must save the earth like for the children who are coming beyond, which yes, we should do that. But it's also there's kind of this um tendency to like push environmental work forward, be like
mm,
the people who are coming, the next generation will solve this. The people that are up and coming, like it's their problem now. Um, which is not appropriate because environmental degradation is happening now and like disaster is happening now and has been happening and will happen. And so we really need to be thinking about what are we doing now? Like if
mhm,
we want to hope for some kind of future, we have to do things now.
mhm,
Because we've tried the future generations will save us and the future generations haven't and weren't able to and like will not. And so that's one aspect. And then in queer theology, or really like queer theory, there's also this in some strands, there's a specific emphasis on kind of resisting the future as the sole goal.
mm,
Because in a very, very similar way to kind of this eco-futurism. Um, there are queer folks now who live and like grow and you know thrive and experience a lot of hardship and hate.
mhm.
And so instead of always looking to the future as when things will get better, kind of resisting that and working on creating a good thing now. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's a really significant overlap with the eco stuff and the queer stuff of, there the future will not save us. Though we do hope for a future, it won't save us. And we're living now. And so the place and the time to take action in service of environmental justice and like queer justice is now.
I love that. It's a conversation that I'm sure that we've all had with folks from older generations who are really like fired up about the environment. They know what climate change is. They care about queer people and they care
Hmm.
about queer liberation. And you talk to them about it, and they're like, "And you guys, you're the generation that's gonna." And I feel so bad, but you're the generation that's gonna have to figure it out. And my reaction to that is always like,
Hmm.
"I mean, you're
Why?
breathing, right? Like you're
Yeah.
still here.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Knuckle up." And as I am getting older as well, I'm starting to notice that tendency to be like, boy, I hope they figure this out because I sure didn't. And I need to have that moment in the mirror of being like, well, I'm not checking out just yet. I
Yeah.
think the the act of service, if I can put it this way, that the gift that I've received the most from the queer community lines up very closely with the gift that I've received from the gospel. I think of the gospel as
Mm.
being this, like, yes, it liberates us from sin and death, but what happens as that happens is like an expansion of your imaginative space. The boundaries of what's possible become so much wider when you embrace that reality. Like God is up to something that we are not powerful enough to achieve on our own, but we don't have to do that. And I think that queer folks in my life have occupied a very similar space of like challenging the boundaries of my imagination, of how authentic people can be, of how relationships can unfold, of how we can be in community with each other in these really beautiful ways that I consider that choice to be authentic, to be brave, to like to choose to be alive now, not sometime in the future, but to be fully yourself now. I think that it's often like framed as this very individualistic story of this person who's chosen to come out of how they chose to be authentic. But it's a really collective story because when any one person decides to be who they are, they make it possible for the people around them, or at least a little bit more possible for the people around them to do that as well. And I think that that's life saving. I think that as I was reading your blog a couple times through, that was the feeling that kept coming back to me of what a gift it is, what an act of service it is to invite someone to imagine differently than it is. So I wanted to thank you for that. And so I was wondering if, to close this out, one, if you have any recommendations for music that people should be listening to, not while they're
Ooh.
cooking, but for for the remainder of their time during Lent. And two, if there's anything that you want to invite people into in terms of exploring their own authenticity, exploring who they are and how they want to show up in their communities with an eye both towards queer liberation and environmental saving.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that invitation. Um, I I don't know that I have many music recommendations, but I listed a couple hymns in the blog posts, so those I guess. Um, but I'll recommend a book if that's
Mm,
okay. Queer Theology by Lynn Tonstad is a fabulous book, and a very like accessible and easy read. So highly recommend. Um, and yeah, I think in terms of an invitation for this Lent, I would just invite this slowing down,
mm.
sitting, and letting yourself imagine. And even if that imagination takes you to like a strange place of like, is this really possible? What if it is?
Thank you, Kia. Thank you so much for your words, for your time. We're really grateful for this gift that you've given to the community through this season. It's been a wild
Yeah.
ride. We have one more session to go to invite people into Holy Week. Thank you all for coming with us on this journey so far, for letting us be a part of your walk with God through these 40 days. And we're looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, y'all.